So I wanted to talk about a topic of mental sanity, mental illness. A lot of times when it comes to a subject like antinatalism, people that are affiliated with such a philosophy are many times labeled as mentally ill. We do have people within the community that are unfortunately either going through a form of depression, are having to deal with suicidal thoughts, intentions. It's essentially, unfortunate things. And it's not to say that there's not people, if not even most, that are mentally ill within that branch of philosophy when it comes to antinatalism. The thing that I'd look to raise, though, that I believe is not brought up enough is people that are on the other side of the spectrum, people that glorify desire to procreate. I believe it should be mentioned that also is a form of mental illness. Now, obviously, it is a bit more subtle and nuanced compared to the conventional sense of how people perceive the connotation of mental illness. However, there's a certain thought process that has made me conclude that such a desire, such a willingness to bear a child is still affiliated with being mentally ill. For simple reasons such as that when you come into existence, it's an imposition. It's not you coming into existence. It is you being imposed, being dragged into existence. No one can say that they came here out of their own volition, out of their own direction. This was something that was placed upon each and every one of us. So you're dealing with people that sought it as okay, just, fair, what have you, to place somebody to go through a whole contract of birth and death. They understand the process to this nature. They know that this is a decision that they're making on behalf of somebody else, and they deem it as, at the very least, okay. That off the bat is mentally ill in my assessment, because for you to go out and do something without ever having the guaranteed consent, the guaranteed acceptance of that person that you're going to be doing that something to, that is mentally ill, because that transaction in the context of childbearing is always going to involve harm. It's going to involve having to go through hardship, having to suffer, all unnecessarily. And we know that this is a given. We know these things are guaranteed, but we're going to still do it. Again, when you just couple all this together and package it up, it's a form of mental illness. And I know with me saying consent, there's many people that say, oh, well, if they're not here, if they're not existing, how could I get consent? And it just goes back to the point. Because you can't get that consent does not mean then that you go about doing what you were originally soughting after in the first place. Because you can't get it just goes to show the mental illness for you to disregard that fact and go about your own desire. So this is just a video to talk about, again, mental illness. I think, of course, it is more common than not in many cases, because obviously most people procreate, and that's a form of mental illness, let alone, just being in this society, right? Having to do what most people have to typically do is a form of mental illness. This world is sick We can't measure someone's true sanity when you're living in a sick society. There was a particular quote from somebody's name I don't remember. I'll leave in the description or drop a comment. But this world is sick. So to label certain people as mentally ill in a sick and cruel, unjust, unfair world, it doesn't really make much sense. I think we have to do more evaluation into the matter than be so myopic and short-sighted with our affiliation that we have towards people that are, again, mentally ill. Most people are mentally ill. They just either don't know it or don't want to admit it. It's very clear. It's very obvious. Again, if you procreate, you're exacerbating the problem. You're propagating this mental illness. One of the most mentally sane things that you can do is just live out your life, do the best you can, and from there, move on, not to impose life. Life is not good. That's one of the most ignorant things you can say. I don't care how good you may have it. If everything around you is falling down, how good do you really have it? We're all connected at the end of the day. Your goodness, in many respects, will indirectly be good for me, or at least should. So it doesn't make much sense to only focus about yourself, and then you see the entire community around you is failing. I wouldn't want to label that as good for my life. I don't care how good I have myself going, and I have myself doing fine. But for me to say my life is good, again, very myopic, very short thinking type of processing. So just wanted to label this video describing mental illness. I think it's more common than we think it is. Just think about not that many people, and people don't even want to talk about something like politics. There's many people that say, I don't get into politics. It's just depressing. I don't read the news. I don't watch the news. So you're pretty much dismissing a very dominant part of your existence. That is the community around you, the world around you. Obviously, there's many things that we cannot really do. We're just in the mix of. But because we can't do anything, and then you're putting somebody else in that position of having to go through that realization that, wow, there's a lot of crap going around me that I can't really change. So I'm just always going to be around a bunch of crap. I mean, what that's mental illness. That's mental illness. There's one thing to understand that, yes, when it comes to things like Ukraine, Russia, inflation, gas prices, right, rent hikes, there's certain things that you can't really necessarily directly change, but you understand that, you go about your life. Yes, that's not necessarily mentally ill. But to then put somebody to have to go through that process of having to actualize and realize that, wow, there's so many things around the world, so many things that I just have to bear in the sense of it's going to happen, and whether I like it or not, it's going to happen. That's pretty messed up, man. It's pretty messed up. And it doesn't even have to be that geopolitical, just your local community, your everyday life. There are many things that are affecting you, actually, and it's not just in another continent that are, again, affecting you that you can't really do anything about. So when it just comes to having a particular job, having to, again, with your own finances, even just having to worry about these things. These are things that are imposed upon you. And people only are okay with it because this is all that they really have. So, again, when people impose this type of reality, it's a form of mental illness. It really is, because you're limiting somebody. You're limiting somebody. The physical form, sentience, is a limitation. You're held in bondage. Why would you put somebody in bondage? and just having to go through the process of birth and death. Those two acts alone are forms of traumas. I mean, people talk about having to heal all the time. You see that word so commonly spewed today. Oh, this person needs to heal. They need to heal. Why are we having to heal so much? We're all mentally ill for the common denominator. This is what this world is founded upon. Because again, when it comes to the act of procreating, fundamentally that takes mental illness. So we're founded upon mental illness. So to then only specifically label such to particular groups of people isn't really that correct. It's not really that, I don't want to say genuine. It's not really fair. Because again, from where we have gotten our makeup, from where we come to be, that's what we're founded upon. Injustice, unfairness, cruelty, mentally illness of that of our parents. That's just a fact. If you're going to impose unnecessary harm, and then you include that with harm that you can't really predict, you don't know how certain lives are going to turn up, but anyone that comes here will suffer. If you have a body, you're going to suffer. That's at bottom. That takes mental illness. So I just think people need to kind of revamp their worldview, their perspective on that. You can let me know if what I'm saying doesn't make much sense. Iron sharpens iron, but I can't see how someone would do something like that, i.e. procreation, and not be labeled as mentally ill. I can't fathom how that's a sane position. In the context of traditionalism, the conventional sense, I'm not arguing the conventional sense per se. I'm just talking about true ill. That is wicked. That is pretty corrupt. Sociopathic, whatever label you want to throw at it, but it's not truly sane. In a spiritual sense, it's not. So yeah.